Hi, Crime Junkies. I'm Ashley Flowers.
And I'm Britt.
And this is Chuck, the Chuck of Audio Chuck. Please forgive us, but our 14-year-old man wanted to cuddle today, and I'm allowing it.
Totally.
And it's not going to keep me from telling you an incredible story. And that story is a mystery right out of our home state of Indiana. I've heard this story, but listen, Britt, the circumstances of this are so foreign that it always felt so far away to me. We're talking horse mobsters, illegal medical boats operating out in open waters. There has been no case like this before or since, and that's why it's one of Indiana's most infamous cases. The workday has barely started on Monday, July 4th, 1966, when Indiana Dunes State Park, which today is surrounded by Indiana Dunes National Park, it's like a whole thing anyways. Superintendent William Speck is getting a panicked call on his office phone. The caller IDs himself as Harold Blough, and he's like, look, my daughter and her friends were at your park on Saturday. It's Monday now, and they haven't come home. My wife and I are super worried. These are three young women. Harold's daughter, Patricia, she's 19. Her friends, Ann Miller and Renee Bruhl, are around the same age, 21 and 19 respectively.
Okay.
But Patricia still lives at home, and she wouldn't leave for days without giving her parents a heads up. And Patricia had even told her mom Saturday, that morning when she left, that she would be home that night for dinner. And the other girls were supposed to be home too, but none of them returned to their Chicago homes just over the state line. Speck tells Harold, okay, listen, I'll look into it. But this uneasy feeling starts to creep in his belly because he might already know something about the missing girls, and it could be bad. You see, 2 days before, on Saturday, a park ranger had brought a bunch of random items into his office saying that there were things that had been left on the beach of Lake Michigan by 3 women who went into the water and boarded a boat around noon that day, but then never returned.
How did they know that?
Because there were witnesses. There were some teenagers nearby that had seen them get onto the boat. They saw them leave their stuff. And then they alerted the ranger when they were, those teenagers were getting ready to go and the stuff was still there. Because it seemed like this is the kind of stuff that you, you would leave only if you were planning to come back, right? There's the thermos, some sunglasses, lotion, those kind of things. Even more significant items too, like cash, a purse, clothes, a pair of shoes. They should have been back.
Right.
Now, at the time, the ranger wasn't especially concerned when he collected these things, though the Chicago Tribune reports that he did get a description of the boat, at least, which they said was a small boat with white exterior and a blue interior, maybe turquoise-ish blue. And it had an outboard motor. They even gave the ranger a description of the driver, which they say was a tan, dark-haired young man. But listen, people leave stuff on the beach all the time, especially on crowded days like the Saturday before the 4th of July. So at the time, he just gathered the things up and dropped them in Speck's office. But no one was out manning a massive search or trying to find the owners of these items at the time. Now, everyone kind of thought that whoever it was that owned these things would eventually come looking for the stuff at some point. But now, with this phone call, a darker thought washes over Speck. Lake Michigan is notorious for its strong, unpredictable currents. It is not outside the realm of possibility that the women, maybe even their captain too, had gone for a swim or gotten into an accident and found themselves outmatched by Mother Nature. We live here, so many people underestimate Lake Michigan.
Yeah.
Yeah, so once he hangs up with Harold, Speck starts rifling through the items. He's looking for clues. And to be fair, he doesn't even know that the women who left these things were Patricia, Ann, and Renee. It just, to him, feels too much of a coincidence not to be. Mm-hmm. But that's the first order of business, right? Now, when he finds a keychain with car keys and a miniature Illinois license plate, and realizes that the plate has what looks like a pretty legitimate plate number, he gets this idea. He calls a few employees, sends them out to check the parking lot near the dunes. And sure enough, there is a car with that exact plate in the lot. And sure enough, when they run down the plate number with Chicago PD, Speck gets the confirmation he needs. The car in the parking lot is registered to Ann Miller from the Chicago suburb of Westchester, which makes this official. He has got a triple disappearance on his hands, and something of that magnitude is above his pay grade. So that's when seasoned Indiana State Police investigator, Detective First Sergeant Edward Burke, steps in to help the investigation. And he doesn't waste any time. One of his first moves is to go through the purse that had been left on the beach. And it turns out that purse belonged to Renee. And he knows it's hers because inside he finds this rather intriguing letter. Now, Anne and Patricia lived at home with their parents, but 19-year-old Renee is actually married and lives with her husband at the time. And this letter that they find was addressed to him.
Is he away somewhere?
No, so they live together. I mean, I assume they see each other on the daily, but it seems like maybe they were a couple that liked to get thoughts down on paper when there were big things, which I think is what this was. Because basically in this letter, there are some issues that she brings up, like her husband spending way too much time with his buddies, tinkering with hot rods, which sounds light and almost cute, but it wasn't either of those things to Renee. She even threatens to split up over this.
Oh, wow.
But it looks like, maybe she had second thoughts about giving this to him because according to the date scribbled on this letter, it's 2 weeks old by that point, when he's seeing it.
Mm-hmm.
So Sergeant Burke isn't quite sure what to make of it, but he also doesn't have time to really ponder this. Feeling like Svedek might be right about the woman's fate, he calls the U.S. Coast Guard to search the lake near the park, way at the southern end. And boy, does the Coast Guard have their work cut out for them, because Lake Michigan is enormous. I said, you guys, everyone underestimates it. Lake is not even the right word. Over 22,000 square miles, enormous is how big we're talking about. And even if you've seen the lakes on a map in school or geography or whatever, it doesn't give you a sense for it.
No, standing on the shore, it honestly looks like an ocean.
An ocean. Yeah, you can get out there at some point and literally not see land on any side of you. It is huge. So it's not all that surprising when they end the day empty-handed. So first thing next morning, Sergeant Burke gets a huge ground search going to complement the Coast Guard's efforts. He wants every last square inch of the park covered, and also a good stretch of shoreline beyond the park. And it's a hell of a task, and for it, he assembles a hell of a search party. A bunch of troopers and park rangers, obviously, and even soldiers from a nearby base. Deputies from Porter County Sheriff's Office, citizen volunteers who will eventually be joined by their bloodhounds. And with the Coast Guard still at it, they're searching literally plane, train, and automobile here. And maybe not literally, but almost. You get what I'm saying. And by the end of the day, the searches have covered 40% of the park almost. And still, there is just nothing. Now, the Chicago Tribune reports that while the search is put on hold overnight, Sergeant Burke orders a patrol to man the shore until sunrise, thinking if the women maybe drowned, their bodies could wash up soon. And while drowning from a boating accident is only one theory, it's not at all out of the question that they also could have met with foul play. So they got to find this boat, if they're going to know either way, right? And while there are some sightings of white boats with blue interiors, they don't find a boat that could have been in the area, the boat when the girls went missing.
Are they sure they even got on a boat in the first place? I know we have that one sighting of the 3 girls getting on the boat, but did anyone else see that happen?
They're not sure of anything. You're right. All they have to back up even this boat story, from the beginning, is just the word from those teenagers who alerted the ranger. But I will say over the first couple of days as this goes on, when the story starts making news, people start coming forward, they start getting some more witness tips, and that does seem to support the boat story. More people who say they saw the women climb onto a white boat with a dark-haired, well-tanned man that day. And actually, there are even a few reports of them being seen on a larger boat, this time with 3 men. And that was at some point that same afternoon. But for some reason, I think that those are mostly discounted. So a few days into the search, the idea of some sort of fatality-causing boat accident starts to gain traction. But according to more reporting in the Chicago Tribune, random boat debris starts washing up on shore not far from the park. Pieces of seats, styrofoam, scraps of metal, plywood, turquoise plywood. And they can tell that this wreckage came from what the reporting refers to as a quote-unquote outboard motorboat. And like I said, this stuff isn't washing up hours away. It's washing up 3 miles away near some sort of power plant. Now, at this time, there haven't been any reports of a missing boat. No reports of a crash or of missing or injured boaters, which some find kind of strange.
But it also might just mean that the guy who owned the boat isn't around to report it missing or couldn't call it in before something happened.
Right. Or destroying the boat was intentional because they find something weird among the wreckage. The debris is strewn with cans of oil and gasoline. Some of the plywood is even doused in it. So it feels like something fishy is afoot. And yet, pretty quickly, authorities announced that the wreckage couldn't have anything to do with the missing women because there were no reports of a boating accident.
All the more reason to be suspicious. I mean, something clearly happened here.
Mm-hmm.
The boat didn't douse itself in gasoline.
And it only gets worse from there because the Terre Haute Star reports that soon authorities announced that the wreckage is from a rowboat, a metal rowboat.
A metal rowboat that was also made of turquoise plywood and collided with something with enough force to just completely disintegrate it into pieces.
Yes? Right, like it feels like there's some tunnel vision going on here because the Terre Haute Tribune reports that when investigators are asked about 3 different possibilities, right? So like drowning, foul play, or a planned disappearance, their response is telling. They say that there is no evidence of drowning or foul play.
So now they think the women pieced out on purpose?
Well, at first they play it coy, but by the 1-week mark, Sergeant Burke is like, yeah, we're pretty sure this was all orchestrated.
The boat stuff too? Like they blew it up, or that's unrelated?
Still unrelated. They're not even trying to make sense of the wreckage. And I get why they start doubting the drowning theory, like maybe a little premature, but I mean, they've devoted so much manpower to searching the southern end of Lake Michigan and from like every angle too. They've got those ground searches, boat search, whatever. Like divers are even in there. And with everything, they're thinking like if the women did drown, like someone should have found something by now that indicated that.
Okay, so not drowning, but no evidence of foul play. Based on what?
On the fact that there's no evidence?
But there's also no evidence that it wasn't foul play?
I know. I feel like we've done this like dance before.
Yeah.
Oh, Chuck's getting up. What do you want to do, Bubba? You can get down. Good job, buddy. You were a star. Anyways, the whole idea of it not being foul play because there's no evidence of foul play, to me that's bananas, especially when the one thing that might have been the evidence of foul play has been discounted.
Yeah, and listen, I get that walked off on their own is always a theory when you have a person go missing. But to me, it seems super far-fetched to think about 3 women with 3 different lives, 3 different sets of circumstances, all committing to disappearing at once on purpose. It's not possible. It's just...
It's like, it's way less likely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think mostly they think this because there start to be some supposed sightings, I guess, like near and far. One like on a bus or like in a bar or a club or whatever. And these are like miles and miles away with strange men. Sometimes they're even seen like hitchhiking, according to the Chicago Tribune. And all of these, like they never turn out to be legit, but investigators run each one down and they keep coming in. So I'm sure that's playing a role here. But I also suspect that it has a lot to do with the letter that they found in Renee's purse, the one to her husband.
The one about the hot rods?
Yeah, they decided basically that she may have wanted to just skip town on account of her marital discord.
She didn't even give him the letter, though. And that does nothing to explain the other 2 disappearing with her.
I know. And they obviously questioned the husband, by the way, like he's in the clear. So her loved ones are like, okay, we hear you, but also are you serious right now? Like she's 19 years old and her feelings were hurt over like something you can probably work through.
Right.
And that was weeks ago.
And again, I say it has nothing to do with why Anne and Patricia would have left. Like, they're not giving up their lives in, solidarity over a husband's hobby?
Not maybe in solidarity. The Chicago Tribune reports that according to Sergeant Burke, all 3, Anne and Patricia included, have quote-unquote personal problems, but he wouldn't say what those are. Which isn't to say, we don't know what he's getting at, because long story short, what we know is that Patricia's sister, Janice, tells Dateline in a recent interview, so we find this out way later, that Patricia had been canoodling with a married man. And Anne had supposedly told friends that she was 3 months pregnant and might enter a quote-unquote home for unwed mothers, which is very much a thing in 1966. But it is such an antiquated concept in the year of our Lord 2025, well, at least for now, that I asked you to do some digging and give the crime junkies a quick explainer for the young folk listening. Can't know where you're going unless you know where you've been, right? So being a pregnant unwed woman in the 60s, give it to us.
Obviously, like you said, I knew about the concept, but I wanted to read up a little bit before this episode. So I found an article on Scary Mommy, which I'll link to if you want to go deeper. There's even a book on this. But basically, there were these homes where families of unmarried pregnant girls and women hid their daughters away while they were pregnant so no one would have to see them because
God forbid.
God forbid.
Yeah.
What a shame.
Where were the men who got these women and girls pregnant?
Obviously. They were out there living their lives. The women were the ones forced to wear the scarlet letter in the form of that baby bump. Then once they gave birth and their babies were adopted out voluntarily or otherwise, then and only then could the women and girls be returned to polite society.
Love it. So these are supposedly some of the personal problems that Sergeant Burke is referring to, although put a pin in that because we're going to circle back to it later. But personal problems or not, the women's families don't agree. And they are just more convinced by the day that the disappearances weren't by choice. And on July 14th, this is just 12 days in, that fear starts to gain traction when a brutal crime captures the attention of, everyone. Now, it's very different, but it involves multiple young women being held and killed at a single time by a single person, and from the same area where the women are from, Chicago. It at the time does feel worth looking into. And let me just give you a little, the spark notes on this case. Corky Shimashko reports for NBC News that around 11 p.m. on the night of July 13th, a man armed with a gun and a hunting knife climbed through the first-floor window of a Chicago townhouse where 6 student nurses were sleeping in 2 upstairs bedrooms. He crept up the stairs, woke up all 6, and corralled them into a 3rd bedroom, binding their hands behind their back. And he spent the next few hours walking them out of the room, one by one, and killing them one after another. Some of them by stabbing, some by strangulation, and some by a combination of the two. And I don't know why this next detail bothers me so much, but his victims weren't even just the 6 women in the house when he broke in, because 3 more residents had the great fortune of being gone when the bloodshed started, and the even greater misfortune of coming home while it was unfolding. Shimashko writes that 8 women were tortured and killed over 4.5 long hours that night. At least one victim was sexually assaulted, although I would wager that she probably wasn't the only one.
But wouldn't it be 9 victims if 6 were already there and then 3 came home?
It would have if one woman didn't have the right combination of courage, quick thinking, and honestly maybe sheer luck to survive. Her name was Corazon Amaral, and seeing her last chance at survival, she actually crawled under one of the beds while the killer was out of the room. And from her hiding spot, she heard each of her roommates get marched out of the room, followed by what Shimashko describes as muffled cries and then silence. And somehow, he just didn't notice. There were so many victims that this dude lost count.
God.
And so when Corazon crawled back out at around 6 o'clock in the morning, it was just carnage. Shimashko writes that she was so traumatized and so terrified that she climbed onto the ledge of a 2nd-story window and just started screaming. I mean, for all she knew, the killer was still inside somewhere. So once she was safe, she gave police a pretty damn detailed description of the perp, right down to his Born to Raise Hell tattoo. And that ends up being the key, because just 2 days later, a Chicago physician feels his blood go cold when he sees the same 4 words on a patient's forearm. This patient was 24-year-old Richard Speck. Having grown up in Texas, Speck is new to the Chicago area, where he's been staying with his sister and her husband. And like so many killers before him, he's like, no, officers, I swear to you, you have the wrong guy. Absolutely not. Which, they absolutely do not, because his prints are all over the crime scene. Shamosko reports that the assistant DA who eventually prosecutes him for 8 counts of capital murder gives him the dubious distinction of being the country's first random mass murderer. Random being the operative word, since organized crime was definitely a thing in Chicago before this guy, but you get what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
So this random massacre happens to a group of women from the same area just 2 weeks after the Indiana Dunes women go missing. And everyone's like, hey, maybe you should look at this because you got, I'm truly at this point, nothing else other than they walked away, and nobody's buying that. ISP Superintendent Robert O'Neill is like, yeah, listen, we're checking on it, but don't get your hopes up. And Sergeant Burke is even blunter, saying there is no suggestion Speck was near, let alone at Lake Michigan the day that the women went missing. And even if he was, let's just say that in addition to not being a criminal mastermind, Speck isn't tall, dark, or handsome. And he doesn't have resources to get his hands on a boat, or even to charm or lure 3 victims aboard a boat. I will admit that it's a little intriguing that he worked as what the Chicago History Museum calls a quote-unquote apprentice seaman, but I won't waste any of your time on him. At the end of the day, it is decided by all that this is just an intriguing coincidence and nothing more. So the next theory that comes up, it might even be more of a stretch, I guess is what I should say. And it all starts with this guy named Dick Wiley, who, according to the New York Daily News, was supposedly the first reporter on the scene the morning that the women were reported missing. Now, he only covered the case briefly. It's not like he was deeply involved. And within a few years of the disappearances, he quit journalism altogether and jumped into a career in law enforcement down in Florida. But he couldn't get the disappearances out of his mind. They became his own personal Roman Empire, if you will. So Dick Wiley believes, are you ready for this? I'll answer it for you. No, you're not. He believes that the women died aboard an abortion boat.
A what?
Wiley is absolutely certain that the disappearances can be traced back to an abortion boat.
You just keep repeating that like it's going to make more sense the second time around. What the is an abortion boat?
It's exactly what it sounds like. He says it's a boat on Lake Michigan where illicit abortions are performed.
Is that a real thing?
If you ask Dick Wiley, yes. And the theory he has behind this abortion boat is wild. Now, we know that Anne may have been pregnant and that Patricia may have been seeing a married guy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, Wiley posits, what if Anne and Patricia were both pregnant by married men?
Nothing to back this up, I assume. Just kind of a combining of their 2 possible scenarios.
It seems that way. He doesn't give any explanation other than a what if.
Okay.
I'm not sure how or why, but basically he just says that in the course of his personal investigation, he learns that that's the situation. Now, he says that puts them both in a pickle because it was 1960 whatever, and years before Roe v. Wade gave us brief bodily autonomy before controlling women became everyone's top priority again. And we've already talked about what a moral stain out-of-wedlock pregnancies were back then. And in all seriousness, back alley abortions absolutely were a thing in 1966. Botched back alley abortions were too. So basically, Wiley believes that there was this married couple operating an illicit abortion clinic in Gary, Indiana. For those of you who don't know, that's one on the coast of Lake Michigan near Chicago and the Indiana Dunes, so right in that area.
Can we prove that part is real, this duo and their clinic?
I actually had the same question. Google couldn't tell me, so I reached out to the Indiana State Police. They were super duper helpful, and they confirmed that the couple he's talking about was a real couple. Their names are known by police. But as far as the whole illicit abortion operation part of it goes, police don't know. They say that they have never been able to substantiate that part of Wiley's story. But the story goes that one of the women's procedures went south, either Anne or Patricia. They died. And with this being an illegal enterprise, the other 2 had to just be disposed of.
Is he saying that they did this procedure on the boat? Or the boat that picked them up and was supposed to take them to where the abortion would happen?
Well, so supposedly that young, dark, handsome captain was actually this couple's relative. And the thought is that he escorted them to a larger boat. And remember, if you, a couple of witnesses saw them on a larger boat. And the thinking is maybe that's where the procedures happened or were supposed to have happened.
Where is Wiley getting all this from?
This is the thing. We don't know. And we tried to get to the bottom of it, believe me, because all you got to do is spend a few minutes on Google to realize, like, how wide this theory has spread, not so much in traditional reporting, more like in blogs and on web forums and all of that stuff. And so, of course, we thought, like, okay, what better way to evaluate these claims than to go straight to the source? I mean, Dick Wiley is still alive and kicking, so we did our damnedest to talk to him about this case. Our reporter, Courtney, was, like, straight up giddy at the prospect of interviewing him, and she reached out to him on Facebook. She called every number she could find, no dice. Like, there was one person she even got on the phone. We got, like, a very, like, gruff wrong number before they hang up. So all we know is that he claims to have interviewed more people more times and with more tenacity than the actual investigators, he says. And based on those interviews, this is what he has uncovered. But the more we dug in, the more it seems like all roads on the abortion theory just lead back to Wiley himself. Like, this man talks a big game. There is no doubt about that. But I don't know if he actually has the work to show your math, right? Like, how did you get the answer? And I don't think he's been able to do that. And he supposedly had plans to publish a book on this case, like, since the early aughts. There's even an Amazon listing for it still. It's called Life and Death Through the Lens. And it had, like, a publication date way back in 2004, I think, except the book is not available, not on Amazon, not anywhere else in the World Wide Web that we could find. And there's a 2012 New York Daily News interview with Wiley that references a 120,000-word manuscript. But here we are, like, 13 years later, and that manuscript has yet to see the light of day. So if you're going to believe this theory, you just have to, like, take him at his word. And his word, like, I don't know, I think it bears emphasizing that Wiley seems to be blessed with a very active imagination. His Facebook persona, for example, is, like, very much a conspiracy-obsessed, angry grandpa who posts, like, in all caps.
Cool.
And you know, your girl loves, like, a good conspiracy theory. Like, that's my jam. It's who I intend on being a little bit when I'm older. But I also don't want to sugarcoat the fact that his posts get really ugly at times, to put it mildly. And the man specifically seems to have a mild fixation on reproductive rights in general, which I think is relevant considering his theory.
Yeah.
And I have to give you just a little bit of context. So I printed out one of his posts. This is one of his public posts that he made on May 9th, 2021. This man is unhinged.
Just so you know, I'm thrilled about having my voice recording this. Okay, this post is in all caps.
Literally.
Want to wish all mothers a last Mother's Day. Yes, I said last Mother's Day. Just now, over TV, the name has been changed to Birthing Person Day. I hope all you women/mothers see the respect the Democrats have for your kind of devotion to America's youth. Let me be one of the first to announce support for renaming all abortion centers, abortion doctors, and Planned Parenthood groups killing centers from this day forward as a last vestige of true patriotic Americanism. Our mothers. Yesterday, my dear Aunt Shirley was buried at 90 years old, the devoted mother to 4 wonderful children and the surrogate mother of more than 30 foster children in her busy lifetime. She was more than a birthing person. She was God's angel sent to earth to become a mother, not to be a murderer of children or killing centers where confused women go who don't have the ability to be a mother. Thank God she was already in heaven today and didn't have to bear being demoted from a truly loving mother to just another person the Democrats can add to their voter rolls as a person. Sort of like changing the name applied to an illegal criminal alien to a poor, undocumented person. Wow, Ashley. What?
And listen, not to make this episode about Wiley or getting, like, to extreme ends of, like, either side or getting people fired up. But, like, I don't know. I'm having a hard time holding my tongue these days, you guys. I gotta say, like, this inflammatory, like, I think we're all over it, right? Like, everyone's working to divide us as a people because the truth is we're stronger together. And if we're distracted by issues like what things are called, like, we can't come together on issues that matter. Like, who gives a flying fuck what the day is called. It's not hurting anybody. It doesn't take away from me. I'm a mom. Like, live your own life. Worry about your own damn self. Like,
yes.
if it makes someone like feel included, great. Why would I care? I care about things that actually affect my life, my daughter's life, like the fact that insurance companies are like us over right and left, and basic health care isn't considered a human right. I also don't care if it's called the Gulf of Mexico or the Gulf of America or the Gulf of whatever. And while we're on the topic of meaningless rhetoric intended to like pit people against each other, there is even a proposed resolution in the House right now that expresses support for pro-women's health centers. Like, I posted about this. I don't know if you saw it.
I did.
And I shit you not, it says that like these healthcare centers are supposed to address the needs of men. For women's healthcare should address the needs of men. And who, by the way, is Wiley. Is like, that's who we're worried about.
Right,
like,
right.
Anyways, so I know I got a little sidetracked, but I wanted to show you who Wiley is, while also saying like,
give us some perspective.
And like I wanted to show you who he was, but also saying like, let's not let the thing that Wiley said take over this episode. Like, I swear to God, if all the comments on this episode become about Mother's Day, I'm gonna quit. So like, I need everyone to stay focused. So to bring it back to Dick Wiley, that's who he is. He hasn't shown any proof of his findings that could be verified by other journalists or police. While his theory might be one of the loudest ones on the internet, it is not the only one. Because what if I told you that there is another theory out there, one that is every bit as wild, every bit as fantastical, every bit as conspiratorial, and it is the one that seems the most likely to be true. Now, to explain this theory, I need to tell you a little bit more about Anne, Patricia, and Renee and their shared love of horses. I know, you're a horse girl.
I'm in.
In fact, the Chicago Tribune reports that while Patricia and Renee had been high school classmates, Patricia met Anne at the Oak Brook Polo Club, where they both boarded their riding horses, and Anne also worked there. In fact, at the time of the disappearances, Patricia owned a racehorse named Hank, and he was one of the biggest reasons that her dad, Harold, never bought into the idea that the women would have gone off on their own. Even if all of the other weird shit could be explained away, which it can't, so there's so much that doesn't make sense, Harold knew that his daughter would not abandon Hank. It wasn't possible. It was something that he said over and over and over again, including to Sergeant Burke. She would never have left that horse behind. You guys know how much I love Charlie. Charlie's like my mini horse. That's how I feel.
I was gonna say, I am a horse girl. I grew up with a horse that I would have never in a million years left behind for anything. He was my baby.
You horse girls are next level too. So anyways, so remember how I told you to put a pin in the women's personal problems?
Yes.
Okay. So Renee's were the marital issues, that we know. Anne's was this potential pregnancy. And I think Patricia's had to do with the wide world of horse racing. So when her sister Janice sat with Dateline for an interview in 2023, she talked about some weird stuff going on with Patricia at the time leading up to her disappearance, like how she was acting strangely the day before she disappeared, scared even, although Janice didn't elaborate. She also described this conversation they had had recently, or before they went missing, and Patricia was crying, which alone is super out of character. Now, some people are criers, some people aren't, and Patricia was not. And she told Janice that she was in a lot of trouble. Janice's mind immediately went to the married boyfriend we know that she might have had, so she asked if she was pregnant.
Don't tell Dick Wiley.
I know, but according to Janice, she wasn't pregnant. That's not it. Whatever it was worse in her mind than that, because her response was, quote, "I wish it was that easy."
Which is saying a lot in 1966.
I know. And Janice wasn't the only person close to Patricia who noticed something was off before she disappeared. A friend of hers had told Sergeant Burke's team way back at the beginning of the investigation about this weird situation in March of that year when Patricia had some sort of bruising on her face. And the friend was like, "WTF, what actually happened to your face?" I mean, it looked like she got straight up clocked. And according to the Chicago Tribune, Patricia said that she was in trouble with some quote-unquote syndicate people.
Like the mob?
This is where the horse mob comes in. So get this. And I'm going to give you a little backstory for just a sec, but I promise we are coming back around and you're going to want to know this. So apparently the 1960s equestrian scene in Chicago was run by a rough crowd known as the Horse Syndicate. And at the center of this horse syndicate was a man by the name of Silas Jayne. Silas had been playing fast and loose in the industry since the late 1930s when he opened a place called the Green Tree Stables and embarked on a long and storied career of lying, cheating, and stealing his way to the top, and defending his interests by any means necessary, including possibly by ordering a hit on one of the nation's wealthiest heiresses in 1977, by the way. Now, most of his brothers were cut from the same cloth, but one of them wasn't. His much younger half-brother, George. And that infuriated Silas. By 1952, according to the Chicago Tribune magazine, George had also joined the stable business. And the thing was, whereas Silas made his money kind of in the shadows, George made his by being a generally competent business owner. And now that the brothers were competitors, that was something Silas just could not have, which led to poor George having some seriously bad luck. Like in 1952, when his house went up in flames for who knows what reason while he and his family were out of town. Brotherly relations took an especially dark turn after George's horse beat Silas's horse at a jumping competition in the early 1960s. And before he knew it, it wasn't just George's property at risk. A hit was carried out on one of his best horses. And George himself was surviving brushes with death damn near on the weekly. Everywhere he went, someone was trying to run him off the road or blow up his house. Like, no joke, one day he and his wife found dynamite affixed to their back door, and it had actually fizzled out before it could cause any damage. But clearly a message was trying to be sent, clearly by Silas, and George wasn't getting it. Now, 1965 is when it really hit the fan. By this point, George owned Tricolor riding stables. And one day in June of that year, George asked one of his employees, a 22-year-old named Cheryl Rude, to move his car for him. So she hopped into the driver's seat, turns the key in the ignition, which is when the car exploded in spectacular fashion. It had been rigged with dynamite, which meant that George had just survived his most dramatic brush with death yet. But Cheryl wasn't so fortunate. She was killed instantly. And for once in his life, Silas came so close to paying for it when investigators convinced his hired henchmen to turn state's evidence. But fast forward to March of 1966, on the eve of Silas's trial on conspiracy charges, the whole case gets dropped when the prosecution's star witness, one of Silas's henchmen, was struck with what the Chicago Tribune magazine reporters called a, quote, baffling attack of amnesia. Now, this is where the women come back in. So March of 66 is when Patricia had a busted face, the one that had to do with the trouble that she was in with some syndicate people. And by the way, no one questions that the women were acquainted with these guys. We know for a fact all three women rode at George's stables, and Indiana State Police confirmed that for us.
But is Silas the married man or George? I don't get why the women are made to disappear in July of 66.
No, so I don't think that either of them were Patricia's paramour. I think the guy she was dating was like another shady character in the horse scene, like not even related. And we don't know for sure why someone would have hit her or threatened her or whatever, but there is one possible and like the prevailing theory that I've seen come from the Chicago Tribune magazine. And it comes from a quote by retired Sergeant Fred Miller of the Westchester PD. What he says is that there was always a strong suspicion that their disappearances had something to do with the car bombing, namely that maybe one or more of the women overheard something or knew something about that, and that is what led to their deaths.
But you'd think that something would have happened to them like before the trial was set to start in March.
Yeah, but I guess it depends on maybe what they knew and why or how they knew it. Like, I think there's a world where their importance as potential witnesses only increased once Silas's conspirators were scared into submission, maybe. Like, I don't quite know. And that's just speculation on my part, but I think it's like maybe the best theory because, well, get this. So among all of the belongings left behind, and I'm talking about the women's on the beach, investigators found not only George's phone number, but also a phone number for Silas's wife, Martha. So like, I mean, clearly like they have those for a reason. And by the way, guess who owned a blue and white powerboat? Well, actually, I don't know exactly who, but like, I don't have a name, which would be really helpful right now. I know. But I know that a man, an unnamed man, who was reported to have like supposedly once worked for Silas, did own one. And supposedly, this boat that he supposedly owned, he often took to the Indiana Dunes.
Did they find this supposed boat?
No, they wish. Like, the guy's wife told them that that boat got destroyed in a fire, which leads me to the last kernel of information that we were able to glean from ISP. They say that as of December 2024, so like 5 minutes ago, they no longer dismiss the possibility that the boat wreckage that washed ashore way back in 1966 was related to the women's disappearances. So much for that whole like spontaneously combusting rowboat thing.
Right.
And I wish I could wrap this story up with a pretty bow, but what that leaves us with are family members, like Patricia's sister, Janice, who are running out of time to learn the truth about what happened to their loved ones way back in 1966. So, if you have any information about what happened that day on the shores of Lake Michigan, please contact the Westchester Police Department at 708-345-0060. And if you're as offended as I am by House Resolution 7, head on over to congress.gov/contact-us to find your representative's contact information and tell them that women's healthcare should be about women. Novel concept, right? You can find all the source material for this episode on our website, crimejunkiepodcast.com.
And you can follow us on Instagram at Crime Junkie Podcast.
We'll be back with another video episode, but don't forget, we have hundreds of podcast episodes. Just search for Crime Junkie wherever you get your podcasts.